In the early days of podcasting, comedy podcasts were like digital campfires, places where friends could gather, laugh, share absurd stories, and for an hour or two, forget the noise of the world. No headlines, no Twitter outrage, no culture wars. Just comedians riffing about life, relationships, embarrassing moments, or whatever strange headline they saw that morning. And that was the magic. It was raw, unpredictable, and most of all, unserious. But fast forward to 2024, and something changed. These same podcasts, once lighthearted and irreverent, became ground zero for political commentary. Entire episodes started revolving around policy debates, election conspiracies, and presidential candidates. The tone shifted. Suddenly it felt like every joke had an agenda, and every laugh was followed by a hot take. What caused this shift, and what has it done to the comedians and fans who built these platforms in the first place? If we're talking about the intersection of comedy and politics in the podcasting world, we have to start with Joe Rogan. His show, The Joe Rogan Experience, started as a quirky blend of stand-up storytelling, MMA talk, and DMT made me see the universe conversations. It was weird, it was fun, and it didn't take itself too seriously. But as the audience grew into the millions, so did Rogan's influence. By 2024, The Joe Rogan Experience wasn't just a podcast. It was a political stage. Presidential candidates actively sought to appear on his show. Why? Because a single Rogan episode could reach more people, especially younger, independent-minded voters, than a week's worth of mainstream media appearances. He wasn't just a comedian anymore. He was a kingmaker. But that kind of influence comes with pressure. When Rogan voiced support or even mild favor for certain candidates, it wasn't just casual commentary. It was interpreted as an endorsement. And when those candidates faltered or were exposed as less than ideal, Rogan's credibility took a hit. Audiences questioned his judgment, they argued, debated, and sometimes turned on him. The stakes were no longer just about a good conversation. They were about consequences. The collision between comedy and politics wasn't exactly planned. It just sort of happened. As podcasting matured, it stopped being a niche playground for misfits and started becoming a serious platform with real reach. The intimacy of the medium made audiences feel closer to the hosts than they ever did with TV or radio. Listeners weren't just tuning in, they were bonding. And when you feel that kind of connection, you don't just expect jokes, you start expecting truth. This is where things got complicated. Because once that door opened, once a comedian started making political comments, even offhand ones, it created an expectation that they'd keep going. That they'd offer their takes on every election, every bill, every outrage. But most of these comedians didn't sign up for that role. They're not political analysts. They're storytellers, goofballs, satirists. Some of them barely keep up with the news unless it's trending on their timeline. Yet, the audience didn't care. If a comedian had 10 million followers, their opinion suddenly mattered, even if it came wrapped in a fart joke. Listeners began using these comedians as a kind of moral compass. If he's backing that candidate, maybe I should look into them. That kind of power is seductive. But it's also dangerous. It turns laughs into leverage, and not everyone knows how to wield it responsibly. What's more, comedy has always been a way to process the world's chaos, to mock it, cope with it, and cut it down to size. But politics doesn't like to be mocked. It's rigid, ideological, and deeply tribal. And when comedians brought political conversations into their shows, they didn't just bring in ideas, they brought in divisions. Suddenly, longtime fans were drawing lines. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. And the podcast, which once felt like a clubhouse, now felt like a press conference. This shift wasn't just cultural, it was emotional. Hosts began feeling anxious about what they couldn't say, rather than excited about what they could. Self-censorship crept in, not because of sponsors or networks, but because of fear. Fear of backlash, of missteps, of losing the audience they worked so hard to build. The fun, freewheeling format that made podcasts special was slowly being chipped away by the weight of political responsibility. And most of these comedians, they were never trained for that. When comedy podcasts first took off, the unspoken agreement was simple. You bring the laughs, we bring the loyalty. Listeners didn't just tune in, they invested. In the personalities, in the inside jokes, in the long-winded, barely edited rants that made them feel like part of an extended friend group. The bond was personal, not transactional. And that bond was built on humor, nothing more, nothing less. But the moment political commentary started to seep in, that loyalty was put to the test. Suddenly, fans who once laughed together found themselves at ideological odds. A throwaway joke about a candidate turned into a Reddit war. A light endorsement was dissected like a State of the Union address. It wasn't just funny or not funny anymore. It was us or them. Some listeners felt alienated, like the podcast they loved had picked a side without warning. Others felt empowered, finally hearing their worldview reflected back through a voice they trusted. But the tricky part? You can't please both. And in trying to walk that line, many comedians found themselves losing the exact chemistry that made their shows worth listening to. What used to be a safe zone, where no topic was too dumb and no joke too far, started to feel cautious, filtered. Hosts second-guessing their bits, tiptoeing around topics they once dove into headfirst. Not because they stopped being funny, but because they knew someone in the audience was going to take it the wrong way. This tension changed the rhythm of the shows. Episodes became heavier. Conversations dragged. The organic flow that made podcasts feel different from traditional media was now interrupted by disclaimers, clarifications, and subtle course corrections in real time. Comedians were no longer just performing, they were managing expectations. And let's not forget the emotional toll. These creators weren't trained political analysts. They were comics. But now, every tweet, every soundbite, every offhand opinion was analyzed under the same microscope used on public officials. Some tried to adapt, others started checking out. It's a strange paradox. Fans built these comedians up by valuing their authenticity. But when that authenticity revealed a political opinion, it came with consequences. And just like that, the jokes weren't just jokes anymore. They were statements, and every statement had a side. While much of the comedy podcast world leaned into the cultural crossfire of 2024, Bad Friends, hosted by Andrew Santino and Bobby Lee, chose to stand their ground in a very different way. They didn't just avoid politics, they built a wall of absurdity so high that no politician, no matter how controversial, could climb over it. And that wasn't a cop-out, it was a strategy. Santino and Lee know exactly what their audience wants: chaos, unpredictability, and the kind of unfiltered humor that feels like you're eavesdropping on two comedians stuck in a rental car for 6 hours with no plan and too much caffeine. Their episodes aren't built around issues, they're built around moments. Bobby confessing some wildly inappropriate childhood memory. Andrew going off on a 10-minute bit about something as pointless as almond milk. It's nonsense, and that's the point. And while the rest of the podcasting world contorted itself to say the right thing or address what's going on in the country, Bad Friends doubled down on being aggressively unserious. They weren't ignoring the world, they were offering an antidote to it. In their universe, the worst crisis is Bobby forgetting to wear deodorant, and the only campaign being run is one to get Rudy more screen time. That kind of commitment to apolitical comedy is rare and risky. It would have been easy to dip a toe into hot topics for the sake of virality, but they didn't. And what's more surprising? Their fans loved them for it. In a year when nearly every conversation felt like a landmine, Bad Friends offered a digital hideout, a place where nothing was sacred, everything could be mocked, and laughter didn't come with a moral test attached. But here's what's really interesting. By refusing to engage with the culture war, Santino and Lee actually made a statement louder than most political rants. They reminded their audience that comedy doesn't have to be socially responsible. It doesn't have to be a TED Talk with punchlines. Sometimes the act of making people laugh, without guilt, without tension, without an angle, is rebellious enough on its own. Here's the uncomfortable truth. With great platforms come great expectations. Once a podcast reaches a certain level of influence, staying silent on major events becomes its own kind of statement. That's the paradox comedians are facing. If they speak up, they're accused of becoming too political. If they stay silent, they're accused of being cowards or complicit. There's no winning, and it's burning people out, both hosts and fans. The original point of these shows was to connect through laughter, but now that connection feels strained, forced, conditional. It's like we're asking comedians to be everything at once. Funny, informed, compassionate, fearless, and totally inoffensive. And that's an impossible standard. So what happens next? Can these shows return to their roots? Or has the political genie already escaped the bottle? Some podcasts will double down on politics, accepting their new role as commentators and culture warriors. Others will dig deeper into silliness, creating spaces untouched by outrage and partisanship. But the landscape has changed, and it's unlikely to ever go back to what it was. The real question is whether comedy podcasts can still unite people in a world that's increasingly divided. Because if laughter really is the universal language, we're going to need comedians more than ever. Just maybe not as political analysts. Maybe just as comedians. If you're still watching, you're clearly here for more than just laughs. You're curious. And that's what we're all about. Hit that like button if this video gave you a new perspective. Subscribe for more cultural deep dives into the worlds of podcasting, comedy, and media influence. And if you're ready to explore how entertainment is shaping real-world narratives, check out the next video on the channel. We're diving into how Twitch streamers became political figures without even meaning to. All the links, including socials and resources, are down in the description. Thanks for hanging out, and remember, sometimes the funniest thing is how serious things have gotten.